Hi, welcome back you guys. Paul here again. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about the actual sand casting process itself. Later on I'll do another video that's going to talk about all the terminology and the exact names for everything. But right now I want to show you guys some examples of what can be done with sand casting. This is actually a hammer that was cast from aluminum. It's actually pretty neat. This is unfinished. This would be how it would come out of the mold blank. Another example is, here is a 3D printed anvil. This is printed out of plastic layers on a 3D printer. We took this design and we created a brass anvil. It's actually pretty neat how you can take a normal object and actually create a replica. And it's exact, as close as possible in all regards. That was a brass one. Here's an unfinished aluminum one. This one just hasn't had all the parts trimmed off yet from the sprues, the vent hole, or the pour. It doesn't have any of the parts trimmed off yet, it's just a crude anvil. But this one is actually an aluminum anvil cast from molten aluminum. And one of the ones I really enjoy is, here's a plastic hammer. This hammer was printed on a 3D printer as a prototype. And then later, we went ahead and cast the hammer out of solid brass. And then once it's cleaned up and all the parts are cut off, we can polish it up and we have a beautiful rendition of that plastic hammer. So that's just some basics of what can be done with sand casting. Today I'm going to show you some of the basic setup for creating something. We're going to go ahead and make an exact replica of this brass hammer. I'm going to go ahead and use the brass one since I cut the head off of the plastic one for another project. Initially, let's go ahead and check it out over here, you guys. What we have here is the base plate. This would be where all the action happens. This is what holds the cast mold or the mold so you can move it around. We start off with a base plate. You always have two molds usually with sand casting to interlock. And by interlock, I mean they can only go on one direction and you have a mold that's solid. You start off the process by actually filling the first half of the mold with some type of sand or clay. What we're using is Delft clay. It has an oil additive which allows it to have extreme cohesion and still maintain detail. And by detail, I mean here's part of a caliper. It can actually indent and keep the detail of all the objects you want to press in it. So we're going to go ahead and fill this mold loosely initially with the Delft clay, and that's going to create our base layer for the part we're going to press into it. So let's go ahead and loosely fill it in there. And this is where it starts becoming very critical. We actually have to tamp the material down so we get a nice tight bond. Because remember, the tighter it is, the more detail you're going to get out of your casting. All right? So we'll use various different tools, different sizes, and we can actually tamp down the material. And then we'll go ahead and finish it off by loosely putting material on top and then continuing to tamp it down. And so now that we have the mold completely filled up and it's all tamped down, it's not tamping anymore, it's very tight fitting, we're going to actually cut off the top layer to create a smooth surface. So we just use a nice straight edge here and slice across. And that gives us a beautiful upper finish. A nice, smooth, firm finish. But before we can do anything else, we have to actually put a small layer of what's called casting talc. This isn't the same kind of talc that you'd use for diapers or stuff like this. This stuff is designed so it can actually withstand some of the temperatures and not get the nasty odor associated with baby talc. If you try that, which I tried once, it smells awful. So try to avoid that. So we have a nice thin layer, and it's always good to take a small brush just to make sure it's evenly distributed across the mold. So now we have our mold ready to press in. We're going to take our item, making sure it's nice and clean, free of any debris, and we're going to carefully press it in to the mold. This is a very tricky part sometimes, because sometimes your mold may crack. So we're going to carefully press this in, and it's about halfway in. Now we're ready for the fun part, and that's actually putting the second half of our mold on. Remember how it has two different pins, a large and a small, so it can only go on one way. And it's nice and tight fitting. So now we have the top layer. This is the critical stage because we need both a vent and a pour area. What I like to do is use two different size wood dowels. This is about right size for a mold, this size for just a vent. You have to have the vent so the metal will flow all the way through and get a nice clean casting. So we're going to put a vent in, just press it in gently, and we're going to put a pour in. And we'll press it in gently. This is the most critical part of putting the Delft clay in because you don't want to disrupt the vent and the pour. So we're going to carefully, loosely put it in there with our hands. Initially, it's going to be basically just a nice gentle finger tamping like this, just to make sure the two pour spouts, the vent and the pour, don't shift around too much. And now we're getting in here, it's tapped in gently around the tops, and as we get closer to the top, we can actually get a little more aggressive as far as tamping it down. So we can take another small piece here, and we can go around all the edges here, and make sure it's completely tamped down. Because remember, we want a nice clean transfer of the item underneath. And so that's pretty good. I'm going to put a little bit more of the Delft clay on top just to even it all out. And then we'll be able to turn our pour mold off and see how it looks. If all went well, we should have a nice, even transfer of the part. And so that looks pretty good to me for demonstration purposes today. And so brush off all the loose and excess. And then we're going to gently lift the top of the mold straight up. And so in 1, 2, 3, we're going to lift it straight up. And then I'll have my camera pan back so you guys can see the finished product there. There we have the complete outline of our hammer. We have a nice definition around all the edges and everything. But now we have to pull out our vent sprue and our pour. So we're going to gently turn the wood and just pull it out. There's one. And there's two. I like to give it just a quick look over. If the vent part or the pour sprue is clogged up, I just give it a little bit of assistance with a small tool. And that looks really good. So now we're going to set this down here, and if we come look at our item over here, we notice we have our brass hammer still here. I look at it to see if there's any cracking around it. Something I'm going to do is just give it a light blow on it to blow off all the loose debris so there's no chance of getting anything in the mold. And then I'm going to gently wiggle the part and then gently lift it out. And so we have a perfect indentation of our part. Now, we're going to go ahead, remember how I said these only come off one direction? We're going to go ahead and clean up our pour sprue right here, just so it makes it easier for the molten metal to pour in. There we go. And now, we can take this and carefully set it right over our part to seal it off. Alright you guys, what we're going to do now, we have our mold set, everything's ready to go, and we're going to go ahead and pour the molten metal. Right over here, we have two identical foundries. Right now this foundry is approximately 2,000 degrees, which is actually hotter than aluminum needs to be molten metal. However, the hotter the metal, the cleaner the pour is going to be. A lot of you guys have probably experimented with that, whether you're casting lead or anything else. It's very similar. Notice I have all of my safety gear on now. That's very critical before I go into the next step. While I'm doing this process, you probably won't be able to understand me while I'm talking because I'll have to have my protective face shield turned down just in case there is a splatter or it bubbles up or anything like that. It can happen. And so we're going to take extreme caution at this point right now. This is the tongs we're going to be using. We're using a graphite crucible that has a ring around it that's designed to grab with these types of tongs. Crucibles can be made out of graphite. They can be steel type crucibles if you're melting brass or just aluminum or lead. You can also have crucibles made out of a porcelain or clay. We just happen to be using graphite crucibles today. So we're going to go ahead and proceed. I'm going to lift the top up and I'm going to explain to you everything I'm going to do here. I'm going to pull out the crucible. When I pull when I lift this up, before I open it up, I'm going to jiggle it a little bit in case there are any air bubbles trapped inside the crucible. We do not want this to be open and have that air bubble expel itself, putting molten metal everywhere. And then I'm going to use the tongs, and I'm going to carefully lift out the crucible, which will be extremely bright, so I'm not sure how the brightness of the camera is going to show up. We're going to take it to our mold over here, and I'm going to pour slowly but evenly into the pour spout. If we have a nice clean pour, you're going to see the metal come up through both the air vent and the pour area. All right? So let's go ahead and do this, and let's see how it goes. And later on, I'll make more detailed videos on step-by-step tutorials on how you too can create a perfect cast out of using Delft clay. So let's go ahead. I'll try to talk while it's going on, but I cannot guarantee you're going to be able to hear me. So here we go. So first, like I talked about before, we're going to go ahead and give this a slight shake just to make sure there's no air bubbles that are going to come up. Open it up slowly. This is extremely hot. The crucible is at 2,000 degrees. So carefully, keeping a firm grip on both sides, we are going to grab the crucible, holding it very firmly and lifting it straight out. We're going to take the crucible and we're going to come over to our project here. This is the pour area. We're going to carefully tip it and fill the mold up. I'm giving that just a gentle tap. What I did here is I gave the mold a gentle tamp just to make sure there were no air pockets within the mold. When I did the initial pour there, when I started pouring, I saw there was going to be an air trap, and so I tapped it and I opened up the bubble in there, and that flowed through where it came to both ports. If we bring the camera over here, which I'm not sure if it'll reach, I can bring it over there before we actually do it. But inside here, I have metal that came up both here, and the metal came up actually right here at our air vent, which means we got a complete consistent pour that went all the way through. This is the point where we have to wait. There's no quick way to speed up the cooling process. We can touch the top and you can see the top here is still liquid metal. It is still extremely dangerous. That is still a third-degree burn waiting to happen. And so you have to still take extreme caution. Notice I'm still wearing all the safety protective gear because when this cools enough to remove the top piece of the mold, we could still get what's called a flare-up. Because a flare-up is caused when the air makes contact with the hot material and causes a flame up, which can lead to two things. Either burns, or it may make it to where I no longer have a beard. Which I've been there and done that many times, and it's just not fun. I'm pretty sure everyone appreciates having eyebrows. At least they grow back. I know that for sure. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any right now. So, what we're going to do is I have another set of tongs over here, which I'm going to grab, which is we're going to use to remove the mold. When I remove the mold, I'll be using these tongs because they can actually gently grasp the material we're going to move out. Right now, we're at the stage where the metal is still extremely hot, but it is solid. So we're going to go ahead and gently lift up the mold. I'm going to put my face shield down, and I'm going to lift it up. What we have here now is a representation out of aluminum of the brass hammer we actually laid in there for creating the mold. This is actually a pretty decent casting. We're going to go ahead and take it and lift it out. And now we actually have another hammer. And this is just the basics of sand casting with Delft clay that anybody can do at home. You can get the clay anywhere, a lot of retailers online or elsewhere, and all you need is a simple basic setup to start casting some homemade parts. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll be making more with more details and steps in the future that hopefully will explain how to do more detailed casts and have a lifetime of fun learning. See you guys later.